Summer 1939. A golden age of exploration and archaeology is coming to an end. It was an era that saw adventurers set out to explore the remotest corners of the globe in search of clues to unlock our ancient past. And it was during that last summer of peace, as the world stood on the precipice of a war that threatened to end civilization itself, that three extraordinary treasures were discovered. Treasures that would radically change our understanding of the origins and diversity of human culture.
That made this stone the oldest datable artwork ever found in the Americas.
And bring us closer to our distant past.
You scared me!
In this series, I'll be on the trail of a cast of remarkable archaeologists, each a product of their era. From a self-taught amateur...
Everybody's pressuring him to get to the treasure.
...to a pair of charismatic adventurers.
We have come upon the hiding place of a unique group of early American heroic sculpture.
And an academic driven by a dark political agenda.
But here in writing, he's acknowledging this figure.
They're fascinating tales of intuition, eccentricity, and luck.
I can't believe it. And now the lost colossal head.
Each show how archaeology was enlisted into the promotion of very different worldviews. And yet each is a powerful reminder of our shared humanity.
To me, it is just an astonishing work of art.
In this episode, I've come to the caves of southern Germany, where just a week before hostilities began, an Ice Age treasure from our distant past emerged from the gloom. This half-human, half-animal represents a revolution in the human story. It's the very first work of our imagination that marks the beginnings of art and religion. And yet it could have easily slipped through our fingers, because the story of its discovery and reconstruction is nothing short of extraordinary. And it begins during one of the darkest chapters in our recent history. On the 25th of August, 1939, in a dark and dank cave in southern Germany, a discovery is made. On the very last day of a 3-year-long excavation in search of treasures from the Ice Age, several fragments of mammoth ivory that appear to have been shaped by human hands are pulled from the ground. The fragments are hastily packed into a cigar box and the trench is backfilled. The find is reported to the director of the dig, a key figure in Nazi Germany's shadowy state archaeology unit, an ambitious academic called Robert Wetzel. A week later, war is declared. Nazi Germany invades Poland. And the discovery is seemingly forgotten. Because, in what must be one of the greatest mysteries of archaeology, Robert Wetzel never again mentioned what was found that day.
What they didn't realise at the time was that they had discovered perhaps the single most important piece of Ice Age art that we know of. One of the first great masterpieces of human history.
And this is what they'd found. Carved from a single piece of mammoth ivory, this half-human, half-animal is a modest work of art by modern standards. But it marks a revolution in the human story, pushing back our understanding of the beginnings of culture and belief by thousands of years. And its discovery in our own age, this traveller from deep in our past, is almost as extraordinary as the object itself. Because the Lion Man wasn't pulled out of the ground on that day in 1939 looking like this. What we see today is the result of not just one, but numerous chance discoveries across 8 decades. Discoveries that at times seem to defy belief. The story of the Lion Man can tell us so much about the origins of art and religion. But it's also a window onto a troubled period in the history of archaeology. Robert Wetzel was in many ways a pioneering archaeologist, but why did he also believe that the discovery of Ice Age artifacts could somehow support the ideology of Nazi Germany? And why, after the war, did he never follow up on what would have been a career-defining find? The discovery of a half-lion, half-man that today remains the oldest known representational work of art in human history. "60,000 years ago, the glaciers covering northern Europe began to retreat. And as the ice loosened its grip, small groups of Homo sapiens ventured into these lands for the very first time. They moved through a corridor along the Danube River in what is today southern Germany. Just to the north of the Danube is a mountainous area called the Swabian Jura. And it was here that these first bands of Homo sapiens settled for a while in the caves that line the valleys of the Ach and Rhone rivers. I've come to one of those caves to see where those first pioneers would have sheltered.
It's hard to overemphasize the importance of these caves and of the objects that were unearthed here. For 100,000 years or more, Homo sapiens had gradually been moving out of Africa, across Asia and Australasia. But it's here, in a small corner of southern Germany, that modern humans, our ancestors, first seemed to flicker into life.
Archaeologists have known that there's something special about these caves since the middle of the 19th century. In the 1860s, paleontologist Oskar Frass was one of the first to prove the coexistence of Ice Age animals and humans. And in the caves of the Swabian Jura, he discovered numerous stone tools and jewellery. But it wasn't until the early 1930s that the true importance of the region was established. Because it was here, at a cave called Vogelherd in the Rhone Valley, that the very first Ice Age artworks from the Swabian Jura were discovered. Not by Robert Wetzel, but by his great rival, Gustav Rieck.
In 1931, Gustav Rieck thought that this would be a good cave to excavate because a badger had pulled a prehistoric artifact out through a crack in the ground. Inside here, however, there were layers of sediments that reached right up to the ceiling. In a sort of smash and grab archaeology, his team cleared this space, and what they would find would redraw our understanding of human creativity.
Found just 8 years before the discovery of the Lion Man. This is one of the many treasures uncovered by Gustav Rieck in the Vogelherd cave.
This is quite simply the first known depiction of a horse in human history. This jewel-like sculpture isn't just breathtakingly beautiful, it also displays the creative skill of its maker. Because although it's lost its legs, the modelling of the muscles indicate that this is a horse in motion. It's got this inherent energy and dynamism to it. Then there's the minutely worked details, the backward-pointing ears, the nostrils and mouth, even individual hairs carved in on the mane that runs right across the top of the head. It really does feel to me like it could just bolt out of the case. This tiny horse is a revelation to me. It rivals the great equestrian statues of ancient Greece and Rome, and yet it's among our first attempts to try and capture the world around us. It revolutionises our understanding of the development of art. We're used to thinking about a sort of evolution from simple, primitive art through to the naturalism of the classical world and onto the beauty of the Renaissance. But this horse turns all that on its head, because it seems that we were brilliant artists from the very beginning.
And Gustav Rieck pulled yet more stunning artworks from the Vogelherd cave. There are exquisitely carved mammoths and powerful muscular lions. An array of tiny masterpieces reaching us from deep in our past. Rieck dated these sculptures to around 30,000 years ago, which at the time made them the oldest artworks discovered anywhere in the world. But these extraordinary miniature sculptures from the Vogelherd cave were soon swept up by the extremist ideology of 1930s Germany. In 1933, just 2 years after the Vogelherd discoveries, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party took power in Germany. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS and architect of the Holocaust, was obsessed by Germany's prehistoric past. He believed that the Nordic Aryan peoples, whom he saw as the original inhabitants of Germany, were superior to all other races. So much so that he believed that all human culture originated in Ice Age Germany. These ideas laid the foundation for the murder of millions of Jews and many others in the Nazi death camps. In 1935, Himmler formed a special unit of the SS called the Ahnenerbe, meaning ancestry, devoted to establishing the origins of the German people through the study of ancient texts, folklore, and crucially, archaeology. They sent explorers across the world, even as far as Tibet, to establish the eventual spread of the Aryan race. But to prove that modern Germans were directly descended from Ice Age hunters, Himmler needed evidence. The kind of evidence that was emerging from recent excavations in the caves of the Swabian Jura. And so, under the banner of the SS, Himmler's Ahnenerbe began funding digs all over Germany. It was an opportunity enthusiastically taken up by archaeologists like Gustav Rieck and the man that would become his greatest rival, Robert Wetzel.
Gustav Rieck's excavations caused great excitement, but also a certain amount of jealousy among fellow archaeologists. Wetzel began his own excavations in 1932 in the Lone Valley. Amazingly, some of his diaries survive, so it gives us this remarkable glimpse back into a past world. There are photographs showing Wetzel himself on a hot day outside the dig and members of his team. All the way through there are diagrams, careful drawings that show what he excavated and on what levels he found certain objects and artifacts.
In contrast to Rieck's hurried excavations of the Vogelherd, Wetzel adopted a far more systematic approach, well in advance of his time. Excavating in metre strips while making careful drawings of his progress. But in another crucial way, these pages reveal Wetzel to be very much a product of his era.
So here you can see a swastika scrawled there alongside Robert Wetzel's initials, RW. And there's a mammoth there as well alongside. The date is significant, 1933. That's the year that Adolf Hitler came to power. So what this tells me is that right from the off, Wetzel was a committed Nazi.
In fact, both Wetzel and Rieck were members of the SS and through the 1930s were in regular direct communication with Heinrich Himmler, both of them vying for Ahnenerbe funding to excavate in the Lone Valley. In the end, it was Wetzel who won the funding and Himmler's go-ahead to begin the excavation of the Stadel Cave, the resting place of the Lion Man. For 3 summers, Wetzel and a team of assistants used picks, shovels and mining carts to remove several meters of sediment. The dig yielded fascinating results. A Neanderthal leg bone, to this day the only evidence for Neanderthals in this region of Germany. The skulls of 2 adults and a child, dating from 9,000 years ago, the adults killed by a blow to the head, and all 3 decapitated and buried together. And then, just a week before the outbreak of war, on the 25th of August 1939, the crucial discovery was made. A day later, all archaeological excavations in the Stadel Cave ceased. Despite being a member of the SS, Robert Wetzel didn't march off to battle. Instead, he spent almost the entire war here, at the University of the picturesque medieval town of Tübingen.
One of the lesser-known aspects of the Nazi era is its influence on universities. At institutions like here at Tübingen, academic disciplines were co-opted into supporting Nazi ideology, a process led by those that had been committed Nazis early on, people like Robert Wetzel.
But just how deeply were the Nazis able to impose their ideology on the university? Professor Hans-Joachim Long has written extensively about the Nazi era at Tübingen.
Wir wissen, dass 1933 nicht ein einziger Hochschullehrer an der Universität Mitglied bei der NSDAP war. Aber es änderte sich dann relativ schnell zwischen 1933 und 1935. Denn es kam von außen ein verordneter Strukturwandel. Es wurde das Selbstverwaltete der Universität, das änderte sich sehr schnell. Bei den Professoren oder in den einzelnen Fächern hatten die Nationalsozialisten natürlich ein besonders großes Interesse, in den Fächern diese Fächer zu besetzen, die mit ihrer Ideologie eng verknüpft waren. Das waren eben die biowissenschaftlichen Fächer, das waren Medizin. Gleichzeitig ging es ja auch darum, das zu erforschen, was man unter Germanen verstand. Also dieser Ariertypus und all diese Reizwörter und Stichwörter, die es damals gab. Das wollte man natürlich in eine gewisse Theorie absichern. Und dazu war die Archäologie sehr wichtig.
And what was Robert Wetzel's position at the university during this period?
Robert Wetzel ist erst 1936 nach Tübingen gekommen. Also alles war schon gleichgeschaltet. Und dazu bedurfte es natürlich bestimmter Figuren, die so etwas durchgesetzt haben. Und Robert Wetzel war so eine Figur. Er wurde Dozentenführer. Und dabei ging es natürlich darum, um Schulung, um die Ideologie zu implantieren, um das durchzusetzen.
With the defeat of Germany in May of 1945, the country was split into Allied-administered zones, and the University of Tübingen fell into the French zone. As part of a process of denazification, prominent Nazis were removed from all teaching institutions.
Die Franzosen haben ihn dann nicht nach der Entnazifizierung nicht wieder eingestellt. Und das war natürlich für ihn die größte Strafe. Er war junger Wissenschaftler, er war etwa 47 Jahre alt, also das war eine Zeit, in der man noch Karriere machen kann. Und da war es für ihn zu Ende.
And yet, in the late 1950s, as Germany rebuilt after the war, Robert Wetzel was back at the Stadel Cave. Whereas at Tübingen University, he was roundly denounced as the figurehead for the evils of Nazism, locally, he was still regarded as a respected archaeologist. And so he was able to raise funds privately to restart the excavation of the cave. He became a well-liked figure in the Lone Valley, where he was known to give impromptu lectures in local pubs, pulling Ice Age ivories from his pockets. And yet, for some unknown reason, he completely ignored the exciting find made by his team in the summer of 1939. The ivory fragments that had been found that day remained unrecognised and unexamined in one of the cigar boxes that Wetzel used to store his finds. It would take a chance discovery and a new generation of German archaeologists to finally realise what Wetzel had found. In the winter of 1969, in the storeroom of the museum in the town of Ulm, not far from the Stadel Cave, archaeologist Joachim Hahn was finally cataloguing the finds from Wetzel's 1930s excavations. He expected to find nothing more than Ice Age animal bones. And then something extraordinary happened. One evening, he began opening the boxes from the 25th of August, 1939, and inside, to his surprise, he spotted several fragments of mammoth ivory that appeared to have been worked by human hands. After a few days of feverish work, Joachim Hahn had pieced together a figure with 2 legs, 1 arm, and only the slightest indication of a head. This was the first reconstruction of what would come to be known as the Lion Man. And when it was revealed to the public, it caused a sensation, which led to yet more revelations. I've come to the storeroom of Ulm Museum, where Wetzel's finds are still kept, to meet Chief Archaeologist Kurt Verberger and find out what happened next.
A person who worked with the Wetzel excavation team, he found in Wetzel's working room these parts. We show here a photo from this, mainly from the head, cleaning up the office room after his death.
So this was found in Wetzel's office after his death?
Yes.
And completely separate from the other pieces?
Wetzel must have taken out these pieces of the head and puzzled them together, but he didn't write anything, he didn't tell to anybody.
I mean, that is so fortuitous that they were able to do that detective work. And then, of course, we have the other ear, the face is starting to come in. This is hugely important, isn't it, as a fragment?
Yes, it was a very, very important find at this time, and we were really lucky to get it to the museum.
But what happened next was even more extraordinary.
A woman came to the museum and she brought a small box with some tiny pieces which her child had found on the ground floor of the cave during playing in the cave.
In Stadel Cave? In
Stadel Cave, and this was one very, very important for the figurine. It was a part of the mouth from the Lion Man.
Now, this is even more intriguing to me. I can understand someone looking through Wetzel's office, finding something that Wetzel found during the digs. But these bits coming out through a child playing inside the cave, this is just too fortuitous, isn't it?
Yeah, it sounds a bit like a fairy tale.
With these two stunning donations, in the 1980s, archaeologists were able to reconstruct the head for the first time, using wax to fill in the gaps. And as this replica shows, it was now possible to identify the figure as half human and half lion. This was an astonishing realization. Nothing quite like it had ever been found before.
Just like the animals found in the Vogelherd cave, the Lion Man is expertly modelled. But while those are miniature sculptures, this really is a giant, a true masterpiece of the Ice Age. There are two halves to this sculpture. The top half is the lion, and details have been really drawn out, like the ears pricked up on the top there, deeply drilled and almost dynamic, as if they could shift around to listen out for prey. Then you've got the back and the arms. They're strong, powerful. The shoulder blades are almost poised at a point of tension, as if he's about to pounce. There's other fascinating details. On the left arm, there are these lines. They're not carved in on the surface. They've been deliberately worked into the ivory. Are they suggesting tattoos or ritual scarification? But it's the belly button that suggests the lower half of the figure is human, because of course cats don't have visible belly buttons. There are other features like this protruding shape at the front. Experts say that this suggests the figure is male. Then the carving of the legs, the calf muscles, the way they feed down into the little pointed feet. This really is the perfect example of zooanthropomorphism, the transformation from the animal to the human and back again.
Looking at this impressive figure, it makes me wonder about those that made the Lion Man and what it took to carve it from a single piece of extremely hard mammoth ivory. Years ago, experimental archaeologist Wolf Hein was commissioned by Ulm Museum to recreate the Lion Man using flint tools and responsibly sourced elephant ivory. It took 400 laborious hours of repeated scraping and scratching to shape the figure. On the hillside, across from the Stadel cave, Wolf explained what he had learnt from the process.
It's obvious that it wasn't made in one weekend. So I was wondering, when did this person do this? On which circumstances? Was it around the fire during the evening or by the night if everybody else is telling stories? Or was it during the daytime when everybody else was hunting?
And do you think it was a single artist, just one person working on this?
I think so. It must have been. Because if you have the idea of making a Lion Man, you would have to finish it by yourself. You can't tell anybody else, well, I started making a Lion Man, please complete it, or please finish it. You're very focused on the process. You're focused on the figurine. You're focused on your idea, making it real, making it visible, making it physical. So I think it was a very special person who did this. I can well imagine that the maker of the figurine sat over here during the daytime because the sun is shining here. It's lovely, it's warm, you have a lot of light. So I would sit here and go carving here because it's a nice place.
Gosh, so we are sat possibly in the creation spot of the Lion Man.
Yes, perhaps.
What a lovely thought.
The creation of the Lion Man clearly required a high degree of technical skill. But what kind of mind created this hybrid being? Nothing like it exists in nature, so its creation also required a powerful imaginative capacity, a leap into another world. In the caves of the Swabian Jura, archaeologists have uncovered not only the earliest examples of representational art, but the first evidence we have for music. These delicate fragments of ivory and bird bone flutes are testament to our early ancestors' desire to somehow transcend the world around us. That music and art appear for the very first time in the very same caves in a small corner of Germany is nothing short of remarkable.
But Homo sapiens had already been wandering the world for about 150,000 years by this moment. So what was it that had changed in the human mind? Why here and why now?
Jill Cook is curator of prehistory at the British Museum and an expert on the early modern mind.
What was the world like for the creators of the Lion Man?
Well, they're fully modern people, so they're people like us. They move into the area sometime around 40,000 years ago. There's these nice caves to inhabit and be safe in. But above all, these little upright people that don't have big teeth or claws are in an environment in which their population is tiny by comparison with the great masses of animals. They are the thing that these people depend on, but they are also the things that threaten them. The extraordinary thing about the Lion Man is that it brings together the largest animal in this environment, the mammoth, with the fiercest animal, which is the cave lion, which you must remember is 30 centimetres taller at the shoulder than a modern African lion, and the human animal. So this funny little intelligent being is measuring itself in some respects with the largest and the fiercest. But in this situation where your life is on the edge, it's also scary, and you begin to think about relationships beyond yourself, both with the nature around you and with the wider cosmos. You begin to imagine things that don't physically exist in nature.
Right.
A lion man.
Which couldn't be, yeah.
So this is not something they've ever seen. This is something that they have perceived, conceived, and then through practice in making and doing, have created. That's an extraordinary leap. It's a philosophy, it's a belief, it's transcendent. It reaches beyond this world and this nature to something else. And we don't know what that something else is, but it doesn't really matter.
And why do you think it is that evidence for music is evidence for the creative act in the production of the Lion Man? Why did it happen in the Swabian Jura around that time?
I tend to think that it is something sociological. They need to develop behaviours which can enable their groups to stay together, that they can trust one another, and coming together, telling some extraordinary story about travels through the cosmos with a lion man, and you've been allowed to spend nearly 400 hours making Lion Man.
Right.
So that means there's a buy-in from the rest of the group. You're not doing anything that's going to aid your physical survival, except you are providing the means of psychological survival. That, you know, we've never lived by bread alone, that you've needed to wish for more support.
The Lion Man embodies a revolution in human development and captures the moment when our ancestors began to imagine other worlds, to think beyond the here and now. But almost 8 decades after Robert Wetzel's original discovery, still more revelations were to come.
These caves have preserved archaeological deposits with cultural material from the Aurignacian period.
In 2008, a campaign was launched to recognise the caves of the Swabian Jura as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. As part of preparations for the bid, archaeologists were keen to make a comprehensive survey of the cave using the latest technology. It was believed that the area in which the Lion Man was found had been completely cleared by Robert Wetzel both in the 1930s and in his follow-up dig in the 1950s. So no one expected to find anything new. And yet, what happened next added another chapter to the already extraordinary story of the Lion Man. I'm back at the Stadel Cave with the man that led the dig, Professor Klaus-Joachim Kind, to find out what this latest excavation revealed.
When you were looking back at Wetzel's diaries, at his excavation reports, was it easy to find where the Lion Man was discovered?
Not really, because people were thinking about the find spot of the Lion Man at the wrong place.
Ah.
Because Wetzel did something very special. In the 30s, he dug in strips of 1 meter, beginning at a 0 point at the entrance of the cave. And in the 50s, he did the same, but he used another 0 point. A colleague of mine in the beginning of the 80s, he started an excavation inside the cave, but he was not looking in the place where the old excavation system of Wetzel was done, but the new excavations, so that he didn't find anything.
Wetzel's meter system was well in advance of its time, and using this technique, he noted that the Lion Man had been found at the 20th meter. But by changing the start point of his system in the 1950s, for the following decades, the find spot of the Lion Man was misidentified, until a PhD student realised the mistake. The 20th meter now pointed to a small chamber at the back of the cave. It was yet another unlikely twist in the story. Professor Kind and his team started to excavate the chamber and soon discovered that the backfill from the last days of Wetzel's dig in 1939 remained just where they'd left it. And amazingly, in this material, they found hundreds of ivory fragments. Fragments that belonged to the Lion Man.
Coming into the inner sanctum of the cave.
We found the new bits of the Lion Man inside this backdirt material of the excavation of Wetzel, and it was exactly distributed in this area, somewhere here. And because it was the last day of the excavation, he used this excavated material to fill the old excavation trench again. That means this backdirt is the product of only 1 single day of excavation.
So you're not looking for it dumped out there on the hillside somewhere?
Yes.
It was still in situ. What's the likelihood that that would then have these fragments of the Lion Man?
Yes.
But there was more. The excavation revealed that the layers of Wetzel's dig were still intact. This meant that the Lion Man could be accurately dated for the very first time to a staggering 40,000 years ago, 10,000 years earlier than previously thought, pushing back the known beginnings of human culture. And so we now know that the Lion Man significantly predates the beautiful cave paintings from southern France and Spain. Images which are perhaps the most famous artworks of the Ice Age. And this new dating means that the Lion Man was made by the very first Homo sapiens that ventured into Europe. But what about the hundreds of new ivory shards found by Professor Kind and his team? What more can they tell us about the Lion Man? The next task was to try to fit these new pieces to the figure. But first, the daunting work of dismantling the previous reconstruction had to begin. The wax that had bonded the figure together was meticulously removed until all the fragments were free. Only then could work begin to rebuild the figure from a total of 800 different pieces, a task made possible using the latest technology. After many months of painstaking work, the latest restoration of the Lion Man was complete. For the very first time, he was reunited with his right arm. Large sections of the back were filled in, giving a dynamic and powerful feline form to the shoulders. The Lion Man had been transformed.
The Lion Man is clearly a spectacular work of art. But what really intrigues me is its purpose. What was it used for? It's clearly a shamanistic object because of what it represents, the transformation from the human to the animal. But is it showing a priest inhabited with the spirit of a lion? Or is it, in fact, the very first representation of a god? The angle of the feet means it couldn't stand up without support. Plus, the surface has been smoothed down by hundreds, perhaps thousands of years of handling. I could just imagine it being passed around, stroked, touched, as part of some sort of ceremony.
But though shamanism has long since disappeared from the river valleys of southern Germany, there are some corners of Europe where its traditions still survive. So that's where I'm going next, to try to understand what shamanism meant to those that practiced it. Ande Sombi is a Sami, the indigenous people of northern Scandinavia and Finland. A law professor at Tromsø University, he's also a singer of an ancient form of shamanistic music called joiking.
Ande, what's the origins of joiking?
Joiking is the oldest way of singing that is still alive in an unbroken tradition from the Stone Age. And in that respect, joiking is not only a big asset for the Sami culture, but it's a European thing. Imagine we have something that old still alive in Europe. And because Christianity sort of rolled over the different shamanistic traditions, but we managed to survive up in the Arctic.
And when you yoik, are you channeling anything in particular, a particular animal? What happens to you when you yoik?
Well, I become that animal when I yoik. So I am that mosquito, or I am this crow when I yoik. This transformation is a very important idea in shamanism, that a human can transform into an animal, and then, for example, to become a crow that can fly over long distances, or become a fish that can swim. So that is a very important idea in the yoik.
In terms of a particular animal, is there one that you identify with most?
Well, the wolf has been following me for a long, long time. I was 17 years when I met my wolf, and my father was a reindeer herder, and he was on the tundra. And then in the wolf community, there will be packs, and then would be lone wolves. So it was a pack that attacked a lone wolf outside the love or the tent. And something unheard happened. The lone wolf came into the tent to seek protection from the pack.
Your tent came into
to my father's tent. Suddenly my father said to me that your eyes is the wolf's eyes. And I heard a voice saying that because you protected me, I chose you to be my father. And then the wolf maybe was lurking there in the corners of my existence and came and introduced himself. And so we are very good companions from way back in time.
Can we hear a bit of the wolf yoik?
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh no no, day no lo, day oh lo lo yo lo on, day oh lo lo la lo day oh lo. Hoi la loi lon, loi la loi lan, loi la loi lon, hey yo loi lan, hoi la loi lon, loi la loi lan, hoi la loi lon, hey yo loi lan, hoi la loi lon, loi la loi lan, hoi la loi lon, hey yo loi yon, hey yo loi lon, hey yo loi lon, hey yo loi lon, hey yo loi yon, hey yo. Lailon, hey yo lailon, hey yo lailon, hey yo lailon, hey yo lailon.
You scared me. Yeah, that was incredible. Very tragic. I'm getting the feeling something very bad is happening to the wolf.
Yeah.
Through the Sami yoik, it feels as though it's possible to glimpse the way the Lion Man may have once empowered our ancestors. The power to shift between worlds, to be taken over by the spirit of an animal. And yet recent discoveries have shown that it wasn't just animals that were depicted in Ice Age art. In 2008, archaeologists from Tübingen University made another sensational discovery in the Swabian Jura. This time in the Arch Valley, in a cave called Hulla Fels. What they found pushed back the depiction of the human form by thousands of years to the same time period as the Lion Man, 40,000 years ago.
This is the oldest representation of the human form that we know of. And what a beauty it is. There's nothing pretty or delicate about this woman's body. These large breasts protrude outwards, and the carvings on the surface give them a volume. Then there's the treatment of the torso, a deep drilled belly button, and lines to show the contours, to show what this body has been through. And of course, the main focal point is the vulva, the place where life comes from. It's really emphasised here, carved in. This is not a perfect, smooth body. It's seen action, it's lived. It's very probable this woman's given birth. That's what it looks like to me. At the top, there isn't a head, there's a loop that means it could be worn around the neck. Who's wearing it? Is it an expression of female empowerment?
The vast majority of human figures from the Ice Age are female. And until the discovery of the Hohlefels woman, the most famous of these was found in Willendorf in Austria. A curvaceous, fecund form, she dates from around 30,000 years ago.
But this one is something else. It's 10,000 years older than Willendorf, and it just has something much more potent about it. For the continual survival of the human race, the power lies right here in the body of a woman. That's certainly coming through powerfully, even after 40,000 years.
The treasures found so far in the Swabian Jura beg one big question. What came before? The Lion Man, the Vogelherd horse, the Hohlefels woman, all of them must have had antecedents. It's very likely that archaeologists will find other, older pieces of ivory sculpture, perhaps not here, but in other corners of the world. Meanwhile, archaeologists in the Swabian Jura continue their search for yet more Ice Age treasures. Nicholas Conard is the current head of archaeology at Tübingen University. He found the Hohlefels woman in 2008 and is leading a dig at the Langmahalde site, not far from the Stadel.
So excited to see an active archaeological dig. What are you looking for here?
Well, first of all, when you start digging, you don't know what you're going to find. But we started digging here 4 years ago. You can see very clearly the line between the original surface and then the surface where we've excavated. And we dug through the Holocene deposits, including the Mesolithic, and then we came upon a fireplace that dated to about 15,000 years ago. And this is, let's say, the end of the Ice Age, the period called the Magdalenian. You can't see too much now because we're getting through the main layers, but there and there you can see reindeer antlers, lots of lithic tools, projectiles, cutting tools, and many other things.
In a way, the fact that there are so many rich finds from the Swabian Jura could be because archaeologists have just continually been building on each other's discoveries.
Oh, I think it's a huge factor, and it's also a positive feedback. We have good sites, we have good preservation. People have been working here since the 1860s, and it's not chance that our institute at the University of Tübingen is one of the leading centers for Paleolithic archaeology, has been for a long time. I like to think that if comparable effort were invested in many other regions, that I think we could get an equally important and detailed record. With a little bit of luck, the kinds of phenomena that we document here are almost certainly playing themselves out in different variants in other parts of the world. I hope, in the coming years we'll have lots of other places with musical instruments, a wide variety of figurative art, lion men, which certainly give us some information on ideas of religion. And these are things that I think we'll be seeing more and more in other areas as work continues. And of course, I hope that work will continue here and we'll have more and more results as well.
The prospect of finding more treasures in the Swabian Jura is tantalizing. But there's one question surrounding the discovery of the Lion Man that still puzzles me. How much did Robert Wetzel know about what had been found that day in 1939?
In the last few years, new evidence has come to light, which adds to the Lion Man mystery. I'm back at Ulm Museum, where Kurt Verberger, the chief archaeologist here, has something to show me.
In the last decade, researchers came across a previously undiscovered letter that proves that Robert Wetzel did, in fact, realise what he'd found back in the summer of 1939.
This letter has been written by Wetzel to Hans Schleif from the SS in Berlin 3 days after the stop of the excavation at Stadel Cave.
Ah, so if it's 3 days after they stopped, it must be just about the time the Lion Man was being discovered, then?
Yes. Wetzel writes, thanks for the last 1,000 Reichsmark. And then he writes that the very last day they had done sensational finds.
Oh, right.
And the most special thing he says, they found Bruchstücke einer Elfenbeinplastik. It means fragments of an ivory figurine And then he writes, man kann nicht erkennen, was es sie darstellen soll, aber es ist sicher ein Schnitzwerk. That means one doesn't recognize what kind of figurine it is, but it's surely a carving.
I mean, this is such important evidence, really, for the Lion Man, isn't it? Because up until this point, we could have thought maybe that Wetzel was in a hurry at the end, trying to clear up before they all got sent off to war and putting things in boxes, didn't realise he had the Lion Man.
Yes.
But here in writing, he's acknowledging this figure carved of ivory.
Yeah. This proves that Wetzel really realized what they found. He writes his letter to Berlin and says, please tell this news to Heinrich Himmler.
Gosh.
And you see, it will be worthwhile digging on.
And it signs off.
Of course, like usual at these times, it ends with Heil Hitler.
Yeah. Now, this seems really strange because he's looking for something like this, something special. It's a figure and it's ivory. You would go back to that spot, wouldn't you? And you would dig around that spot. Why didn't he?
I would. That's really a mystery for us. We had the idea that Wetzel wanted to put away all things which had to do with the 30s and the Nazi times, because he was very heavily involved, as we know. And so he made a cut. He didn't want to know anything from these former things, and he went on digging, but not at the find spot in the same cave, but in another place.
He's trying to distance himself from work he did under Himmler.
Yes, I think that's the reason. And when I talk to people, of course very old people who have learned to know Wetzel in the 50s or early 60s, they remember Wetzel was the good old archaeologist of the Lone Valley. But for me, it was really a big surprise. It came up, this letter, during the new excavations from Professor Kind. At the same time, this was another astonishing thing for us, not only that the new fragments had been found in the cave, then comes up this letter.
Don't you think there's something about the Lion Man? It's got all these incredible unexplained mysteries surrounding it, all these things that pop up, these clues.
It's really a bit mysterious story.
Yeah.
I've come back for one last look at the Lion Man. This ancient figure that remains so full of mystery.
The Lion Man was found on the eve of history's most destructive war, when the Nazis were using archaeology to try to prove that all human culture originated in Germany. Today, we know that humans had roamed for hundreds of thousands of years across Africa, Asia, and beyond. It's very likely they brought their culture with them to Europe. The Lion Man sheds enormous light on our prehistory. It's a beacon for the arrival of modern, cultured humans. But it must have been predated by something. But the question of exactly what and where remains a mystery. It poses so many questions. Questions that will be answered in the years, decades, and centuries to come.